many years ago in the 1960s at Clark College down in Vancouver. But they found out that the weather in Vancouver wasn't really conducive to having a telescope because of the cloud cover so many nights. And on a road trip, they came through Goldendale and decided this was the place. Our Washington State Parks program looks at this as one of the crown jewels of their many efforts to bring Washingtonians into better understanding of the world. To have a public telescope like this available to each and every citizen is quite an accomplishment. The telescope here and the observatory and the whole entire package, it's a very impressive place and one of my favorite places.
This session for our caucus, one of which was work on K-12 funding. And yesterday we finished our work with a major investment in special education, which is going to help districts around the state. Last week we passed a bill that will make a major investment in material supplies and operating costs. And the word that I think we're getting back from school districts around the state is that that's going to help them materially meet the challenges that they're facing in terms of providing a good education for kids around the state. So I think we're feeling quite happy about that and quite hopeful in our discussions with the House that we're going to wind up with a good outcome in that way. The other big focus for us has been around housing supply and affordability. And we have passed over several bills from the parking bill that was the first, Senate Bill 5184, to the Housing Accountability Act, Senate Bill 5148, and many in between that collectively should help to increase the supply of housing and therefore put some downward pressure on prices. So the House has also done a nice job of passing over some bills, including the Transit-Oriented Development Bill that we're considering and the Rent Stabilization Bill. So I think we continue to value and enjoy our collaboration and are feeling quite good about that aspect of our work.
I think the House is feeling similarly happy about about the work that we did off the floor this last days. And Senator Peterson kind of highlighted where I would start. You know, one of our major focus areas was on strengthening communities and having an affordable housing. The rent stabilization bill that we moved off the floor, as well as transit-oriented development and the lot splitting bill. So we continue to do a lot of work on housing, and are pleased with the work that with what we were able to send over to the Senate for consideration. Also really excited about the grants for law enforcement bill, Rep. Entenmann's bill that we got over here, and that work was really very collaborative within our caucus and in discussions with Republicans, even though I don't think any of them voted for it, unfortunately. But happy to be able to kind of move forward on some funding for law enforcement. I think we're also, very excited about like the right to repair bill. So one our focus areas has been really trying to lower costs for consumers, and that right to repair bill, which Rep. Gregerson's been working on for a very long time, moved across the floor. And will really help consumers with their electronic payment, being able to get that fixed and not have to pay exorbitant amounts. And I actually work with local community businesses in order to get that done. So that's an exciting bill. The Senate really led on, as Senator Peterson said, on the school funding issues, but we, obviously moved a major school safety bill off the floor last night as our last bill before cutoff. So, those are just kind of some of the highlights of the work that we did, and proud of a lot more bills that have come across. But now we're starting to focus already on hearing Senate bills, moving them. Things are moving very quickly.
Don't all jump at once.
I'll go then, if they're going to fight over not going. So the debate that went into the early morning hours on HB 1296 to undo much of what the Parents' Bill of Rights did. Obviously, you've seen social media today, I'm sure, and there were like 10,000 people watching that live on X at 2:30 in the morning because there's so much interest in it. And most of the comments I read are people that are really upset about the initiative being undone. Comments about how that all went last night. I know most of the amendments offered by Republicans, I think all but two were rejected.
I think we accepted 4. Maybe my math is wrong on that. But, when we get to this point in session, and, for the most part, most of session, we decide what bills we're going to move off the floor. The Republicans decide what time they move off of the floor. So that's how that worked. And, it had a very robust debate on the bills. I think people should be comforted by the fact that last year when we moved the initiative off the floor of the House, and I think the debate on the Senate, we highlighted a number of issues that we thought were going to cause conflict and confusion for school districts and parents. And then we said, okay, let's go ahead and see how this works. And then what we heard, lots of conflict, lots of confusion. And so the underlying bill, which we have the Senate version over in the House too, is an attempt to fix that. And I think will fix that, make it much more clear how schools should be operating, what parents and kids should expect. Our bill also goes a little bit further than the Senate bill does, because we also gathered the students' rights that you find throughout the statute. Part of what that initiative was trying to do at the very beginning of it was just to gather parental rights, just gather them from across statutes that we had issues placed everywhere throughout the statutes, and tried to gather them in one place. We also did that with students' rights, and made it clear that educators are protected and can't be retaliated against for following the law of this state. So I felt good about the debate. It was long, but it was a robust debate, And I'm happy that we moved this across to the Senate, and I'm happy that hopefully we'll end up with a law that actually is clear rather than confusing and filled with conflicts for school districts, for parents, and for students.
So do you intend on moving 5181 and 1296 then, both of those bills?
We intend to hear the Senate bill, and then we'll just keep on working and seeing how it goes. So we do intend to hear the Senate bill.
And we intend to hear 1296.
I'm sorry, you do expect
We
it?
intend to hear, yeah.
So this feels like a point of negotiation between the two caucuses of how to proceed, because 1296 does include everything from 5181. So, I mean, I guess I'm wondering, do you really want to keep doing this debate, or do you want to negotiate one vehicle at this stage, since clearly both of you have accepted 5181's language, your caucuses? How does this, I mean, do you really want to have is the goal to have more or less? I mean, because 1296 does both, right?
I would say that we have uber agreement between the House and the Senate on this issue. So we'll have to continue talking about that. Senator Peterson and I have talked about it a number of times already, and have welcomed each other's bills. So we'll just see as we move through the process where they go. I don't.
There are a lot of possible outcomes, right? I mean, we could pass the House could pass 5181 in the form that we've essentially both agreed, and we could pass a version of 1296 that has that language removed from it. We could just pass 1296, and they could, with all of the language, and the House wouldn't need to do 5181. If the extra provisions of 1296 run into trouble in the Senate, they could pass 5181. I mean, both bills could also get amended, right, and sent back. I mean, so there are a lot of possibilities for how the conversation will evolve.
Is the governor? Are you guys chatted with the governor to ask what his preference is, or is there any guidance coming from the executive branch on what he wants to see or not see?
I don't mean to speak. You should ask him directly, but my impression is that he's very supportive of the underlying project of correcting the conflicts between existing law that was not properly amended by the initiative and the differing language in the initiative.
Are you concerned at all about attention from the federal government over this? As I'm sure you know, Moses Lake, Meade, Tumwater, all asking the U.S. Department of Education and U.S. Attorney General
Well, that
Pam
doesn't exist
Bondi.
anymore.
Excuse me?
That doesn't exist anymore.
But are you at all concerned? I've heard some suggest Washington State is, and the majority has positioned the state in this place where you're going to have the attention of the federal government because of this movement.
So I'll just be really clear. Washington State hasn't positioned itself in any which way. We protect each and every Washingtonian. If the federal government wants to go after trans kids, minority individuals, immigrants, that's on them. But our values have been very consistent and clear. We protect every single Washingtonian, and that includes our trans kids.
If anything, the proposals coming from the federal government to massively cut health care for Washingtonians, for not just poor but working Washingtonians. As Senator Peterson just mentioned, the Department of Education appears to be gone, so I guess that's not a worry particularly. And the kind of the unplanned decimation of what the federal government usually carries out makes it, I think, very concerning for Washingtonians, because not only are we having Washingtonians losing work because of what the federal government is doing, but we're having Washingtonians just kind of drugged back and forth all over the place by announcements that seem to have no plan whatsoever for how they would be implemented and the effects on the people of this country or this state. And then we get drugged back the other way when there's a decision that, oops, that was bad. We have no idea how these things are going to end up. But yeah, that's very harmful to the United States, to the economy of the United States, and to the people of the state of Washington. very harmful.
I'm going to ask a question about your next favorite topic, taxes. I've been hearing, like, obviously necessary to implement the budget bills exempt from these cutoffs. Curious when we're going to hear sort of the next word on road usage charge, the property tax cap increase at the local level. What's the status of those ideas? And if you can't tell us that, when will we hear about those?
So we've started already processing some of the bills that are necessary to implement the budget. So we passed a major rollback of parts of the Fair Start for Kids Act off the floor yesterday. And we have several other bills that are on. We had a pension smoothing bill. We passed earlier the merger of TERS 1, PERS 1, and LEF 1, which is a significant budget move. So we are doing the work, as we have been saying, to consider reductions in the budget. And then, the budgets will come out, I guess a week from Monday. And that's when we will start to have the conversation about how to bridge the gap between the reductions that we're able to come up with and the needs that we have identified in the budget.
When did you say the budget?
24th.
One bill that appears dead is the blood alcohol 0.05. Were the votes not there? Was the data not there? Why? Maybe start with you, Senator Dinger. I know that was something on your list.
Absolutely. I think the data is clear. 75% of the world lives under 0.05. I do think the BAC level is not a partisan issue. I think you'll find people on both sides of the aisle who have a different opinion on it. I was disappointed we didn't get it across the finish line this year. We'll try again next year. But I think the data is clear that when you have a 0.05 BAC, it changes people's behaviors. It changes how they behave after they've consumed alcohol. And that is really what we want. We want people to be responsible and not get in a car and drive after they have had too many drinks. So it does...
Or maybe at all.
Or at all. We do designated drivers. I've traveled all over the world, and I know when we were in Australia, there were people who actually had a PBT, a portable breath test, and they would just test themselves before they got in a car. That's a culture change. How do we show up, and how do we engage with alcohol and the very, very dangerous act of getting behind a car after you've had alcohol? And in this state, we also have people combining drugs, right? You have alcohol and you have marijuana, and that changes how you get behind a car as well. So I think we need a lot more education. We need to make sure our members are comfortable. I think there's a lot of misinformation on what it takes to even get to a 0.05. People assume it's one drink, and that's absolutely not true. So, we'll keep chugging along, and I do feel that every year the bill gets more and more support. So we're heading in the right direction.
I just would add, this isn't really about the BAC bill, but traffic safety issues I think have been an important issue the last number of sessions, just because of what we've seen, high rates of speed driving. So we moved a bill from Representative Levitt on speeding over to the Senate. I think it was the days run together for me, but I think yesterday at some point, or in the last couple of days, we moved Representative Donaghy's bill on young drivers forward. So we're really trying to do work to help improve traffic safety.
And I'll just add, distracted drivers, especially with their cell phones, that is a huge component when we talk about traffic safety. We really have to make sure people are just not touching their phones and engaging with their mobile devices while they're driving.
About rent. The version that passed the House on Monday seems to have taken out a number of provisions regarding fees and some other protections, I think, for non-manufactured renters. Can you just talk about kind of how you got to that point, and if anyone in the Senate can speak to if you guys are involved in those talks at all?
We made the decision to focus the bill on the central policy, which is the year-over-year cap in rent increases that are allowed at 7%, and decided that the that focusing on that sort of most important, most central policy would, was the right focus for the year. So yeah, we took out policies related to move-in fees and late fees in order to just focus the debate primarily on that core protection for renters. And I think that lowered the temperature on the bill considerably, and of course, we know that constituents are still impacted by things like move-in fees and late fees, but we thought it made sense to just focus the bill for now.
I think those changes will help over here, and there's still going to be more work to do to get to a bill that will have majority support in the Senate. But I'm working closely with Senator Bateman, Senator Trudeau, Senator Alvarado on that process.
Would that be something you'd work on in the future, is eliminating some of those taxes and fees or capping those taxes and fees if you get the rent stabilization across the finish line? Could you see yourselves looking at that later?
It's hard to imagine where our focus will be once we get through this session, but we know that late fees, move-in fees are still things that we hear about from tenants. We know that regulating those, has opposition from landlords. So those, I think we will probably continue to look at the landlord-tenant relationship in all future sessions. But this year, those issues were, we thought, less important to move forward than the year-over-year rent cap.
I would just note, just conceptually, one of the rules is that a legislature cannot bind a future legislature. So I'm not in the business at all of saying we will never do this or we will always do that, because every year, but every 2 years, our legislature changes in very big ways with new members, and so you can just never take anything off the table or put it on the table and say we're absolutely or never.
Senator Peterson, I wanted to ask, before session started, you mentioned that you believed that you had the support in the Senate Democratic caucus to pass the rent bill. Now you're saying that it still is going to take some work. What changed?
I don't think that anything has changed. I didn't say the rent bill meaning a particular cap and a particular but yeah, I think we will have the votes to pass rent stabilization this year. But there are a number of dials within that policy that I think we have members interested in adjusting before it's complete. So,
Any specifics?
I think there's interest in looking at the exemption period. I think there's interest in looking at the cap, and that could be an adjustment in the percentage. It could also be the idea of what they call banked capacity, so that you could, a landlord in a particular landlord-tenant relationship could decline to raise the rent in 1 year, but then preserve that cumulative capacity later if it turned out that there was a roof failure, for example, that they needed to have more income to deal with. So, I think there are a lot of conversations going on right now. The math is not complicated. In some ways, we have 18 members of the caucus who are co-sponsors of the bill, and so you need 7 more. And that means 12 members are not co-sponsors on the bill. I don't suspect we're going to have any Republicans voting for it. So out of the 12, you need to find 7 and figure out what, if any, changes they would like to see in the policy. And can you get to a place where 25 of us can agree? And then can we get to a place where we agree with the House? That's what we do all the time on bills, and on this bill in particular. That will be a significant focus of our efforts here over the next few weeks.
A couple of days ago, the Senate Republicans unveiled a no drastic cuts budget plan. What was your
I like that we've now added an adjective to the no cuts.
No drastic.
No drastic cuts.
What were your thoughts on that?
The Senate Republicans were sitting with the Senator Robinson and Senator Stanford in many weeks of preparations, and so I think it's not surprising there's a lot of overlap there. They also came up with some additional ideas that I think Senator Robinson has found helpful, and that we will likely incorporate into our budget. This is a hard problem that we're facing, and we welcome all good ideas about how to do it. So, I absolutely think that there are things that we can borrow or plagiarize out of their efforts. That said, the fundamental idea that you can balance the budget by failing to pay our public servants is going to be pretty challenging for our caucus. We have been in a high inflation environment, and those changes in the cost of living affect everyone, including state employees, including teachers. Like you can't. So the idea should just have their standard of living go down while everyone else moves on and doesn't make any sort of sacrifice. Doesn't seem correct to us. So I think there's a lot of overlap. We will borrow some ideas. They borrowed some ideas from us, but ultimately, I think that'll be the main difference that you'll see in the budgets.
And I'll just say I was disappointed to see our Republicans going after state employees the way the Republican administration is going after federal employees. These are people who serve our communities, provide services and support to each and every one of us. And to really have them suffer because they can't get, have their affordability issues met just because they work in service to our government, I think is blatantly unfair.
I'll add, just last November, we had 62% of Washington voters reject a repeal of the Climate Commitment Act, and not just in King County, also in Yakima County and Walla Walla County and Okanagan County and Spokane County. And the debate over Initiative 2117 really hinged on what the investments in our state's health and resiliency and clean air would go away. And so the Senate Republican proposal sweeps all of those sweeps all of that dedicated investment into the general fund. We think that's not holding up our end of the bargain with the voters to say, reject this initiative, we need to continue these investments. Oh, by the way, we're going to cancel the investments and take the money for the general fund. We don't think that would be upholding our end of the deal with the voters.
My understanding of the proposal was that CCA funding would be redirected to the Working Families Tax Credit, which is what it was originally stated it would do.
No, it was never stated that it would do that. It was stated that that was an eligible use. Okay. Currently, that's paid for with the general fund. And so to eliminate all the investments that we talked about over the course of 2024 and supplant general fund, the general fund's covering of the Working Families Tax Credit, doesn't seem like it's what people voted for.
Can you clarify this? Though it's not that much money. I mean, it'd be a couple $100 million if you supplanted the working family.
Million is a lot of money.
If you supplant and use the CCA money, which is an allowed use, you would then free up $200 million or whatever it is.
600.
Over 4 years. I'm talking about a 2-year budget, right?
Yeah,
you would free up money for the general fund that you could put into programs, and you wouldn't have put the Working Family Tax Credit into the Climate Commitment Act if you didn't think that that was a viable part of the approach.
It is legal to use the Climate Commitment Act to pay for the Working Families Tax Credit. To defund all of our clean air and clean water and forest health investments in order to free up capacity in the general fund, I do not believe that is what the voters voted for.
So I'll just add, the budget is our value statement. What do we value as a state and as a people? Protecting our environment is critical. Our voters have told us over and over again they want clean air, they want clean water, they want us to transition to clean energy. This is something Washingtonians have wanted. So you have to make sure you are being consistent with that value. We have to make sure we're standing up and protecting our special needs kids. That is a value we fundamentally believe in, and that is what we're delivering on. And you have to take care of people. I mean, those are just fundamental values that you will absolutely see in the Democratic budget, and the concern really is on really removing funding from our environment. And we don't have to go again and talk about what's happening at the federal level, but you got to make sure we have clean water and breathable air.
I guess my question, maybe this is a March 24th question. It's my understanding that Climate Commitment Act dollars are not part of the general fund. You use it for programs, but you've made a commitment to not budget it as part of the general fund, and you've kept it separate. Are you changing that this year and including it? You tell us how you spend it, but it's not been positioned as part of your general fund.
Is that to zero out all of the Climate Commitment Act funding that is going to clean air and clean water and forest health and wildfire prevention and flood prevention, and instead use that to supplant the cost of the Working Families Tax Credit, which is currently a general fund cost, means that all of those investments that we spent all of 2024 talking about with Washingtonians, would not continue in order to free up capacity in the general fund to, spend on K-12 and, not really increasing K-12 spending as the Senate has passed bills to do, but to, essentially hold steady funding there. So, that's just not an approach that you're going to see reflected in our budget.
And just kind of hog, but so would you prefer to see, say, $150 million go to provide grants for electric vehicle chargers or go into special education?
I don't think that we need to choose between those two things. The voters, we had a big campaign and got nearly 2/3 support for the idea that the money that is coming from the carbon fees ought to be directed toward reducing emissions, toward resiliency in the face of climate change. And, the voters on that basis, after a campaign about those exact issues, upheld that idea. Separately, the voters voted by an even larger margin to protect the capital gains tax and the investments in public schools and in early learning, right? And we know that folks across the school districts across the state are really struggling. Parents across the state are really worried about the effect on public schools. So that's the reason that we, with large bipartisan majorities, approved additional funding for public schools in the Senate. Now, our budget will reflect those investments. The Senate Republicans, although they voted for the bills, did not make those investments in their budget, and I think are essentially telling districts around the state that they've just got to make cuts.
I wanted to ask really quickly about the governor's powers bill. Obviously, the governor was asking for that. Republicans really wanted that. What happened? I guess why couldn't there be a bill this year to make that change or to address that?
Senator Valdez reported out a bill in a form that he was comfortable with, and and that bill was no longer supported by the Republicans. So, in the meantime, the governor has announced how he intends to exercise his powers, and I think that's entirely within his prerogative. We're more than open to continuing to make discussions about how to bind future governors, but that's going to have to be a conversation that involves both parties, both chambers, and the governor's office.
We got one more. All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.